They say killing a legend makes you famous, but on the American frontier it also makes you hunted by history itself. Because once you end a myth, you inherit its shadow, and no man ever lived comfortably inside one. Pat Garrett learned that the hard way, and this is not the story people usually tell about him because it is not about victory. It is about the terrible price of being the man who pulls the trigger when the whole country is watching. Pat Garrett was not born to be famous. He was born into a harsh, unforgiving America that demanded strength long before it offered opportunity. Growing up on the edge of civilization, Garrett learned early that the West did not care about dreams, it only cared about survival. Men were measured not by who they were, but by whether they could endure the heat, the hunger, and the violence that ruled the frontier. In that world, Pat Garrett was not extraordinary, but he was solid, dependable, and willing to do what others would not. While Billy the Kid was becoming a legend in blood and headlines, Garrett was becoming something quieter and more dangerous. A man who understood how law actually worked in a land where paper meant little and force meant everything. Garrett did not believe in romance or rebellion. He believed in order because without it, nothing lasted. Not families, not towns, not futures. He had seen too much chaos to mistake it for freedom. When New Mexico decided that Billy the Kid had to be stopped, they did not look for the fastest gun. They looked for the man who would not blink. And that man was Pat Garrett. The job he was given was not just to catch Billy, it was to end him, because Billy was no longer just a criminal. He was a problem that embarrassed the territory, undermined its authority, and threatened the fragile idea that the West could be governed by law rather than fear. Garrett accepted the job knowing exactly what it meant. He was not hunting a man, he was hunting a symbol, and symbols fight harder than flesh. Billy the Kid was young, fast, charismatic, and beloved by many who saw him as a rebel against corrupt power. Killing him would not bring peace, it would bring judgment. But Garrett believed something deeper, that if the law did not prove it could win, then nothing else in the West would matter. The hunt was relentless. Garrett tracked Billy through deserts, towns, and whispers, closing in as the kid ran out of places to hide. Every step Garrett took was heavier than the last, because he knew that no matter how it ended, his life would never be the same. Either he would fail and become a joke, or he would succeed and become something far worse, the man who killed the most famous outlaw in America. Billy tried to escape. He always did. But the frontier was shrinking, and the walls were closing in. Garrett waited. He studied Billy's habits, his friendships, his patterns, because Garrett understood something that few lawmen ever did, that the only way to catch a legend is to let him believe he is still free. And then came the night at Fort Sumner. In a quiet room with no crowd and no ceremony, the moment arrived that would freeze Pat Garrett in American history forever. Billy the Kid walked into the dark, aware that Garrett was there. There was no duel, no warning, no second chance. Billy fell, and the West changed in a heartbeat. Pat Garrett had done his job. The law had won. The outlaw was dead. But that was only the beginning of his punishment, because when you kill a legend, the story does not end. The moment the news spread that Billy the Kid was dead, Pat Garrett believed for a brief and dangerous instant that his nightmare was over. The hunt had ended. The most famous outlaw in the American West lay in a grave. The territory of New Mexico could finally breathe. But history is cruel to the men who carry out its most necessary acts, because once the applause fades, only judgment remains. And Pat Garrett would soon learn that killing a legend does not bring peace. It brings a lifetime of scrutiny. At first, there was celebration. Officials praised Garrett. Newspapers printed his name across the country. Politicians congratulated him for restoring order to a lawless land. For a moment, it seemed as if Pat Garrett would be remembered as the man who saved the frontier from chaos. But something strange happened as the days passed. The story of Billy the Kid did not die with him. It grew. The outlaw became a martyr to many, a symbol of rebellion against what they believed was a corrupt and heavy-handed system. And in every story, Garrett was no longer the lawman. He was the villain. People began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why had Garrett shot Billy in the dark? Why had there been no arrest, no trial, no final chance? Rumors spread that Billy was unarmed, that he was betrayed, that Garrett had waited in the shadows instead of facing him like a man. None of it could be proven. But on the frontier, perception mattered more than truth, and the perception was devastating. Garrett tried to defend himself with facts. He had a warrant. Billy had escaped before. Billy was dangerous. Billy would never surrender. But legends do not care about facts. They care about emotion. And the emotion of the American West, especially in the former Confederate territories, was not on Garrett's side. Billy the Kid represented defiance. Pat Garrett represented authority. And after a brutal civil war, authority was not trusted. The more Garrett spoke, the more the narrative hardened against him. Writers romanticized Billy. Songs were written. Stories exaggerated his youth, his charm, his supposed kindness. Meanwhile, Garrett was painted as cold, calculating, and ambitious. The man who had risked his life to enforce the law became, in the public imagination, a traitor to the spirit of the frontier. This inversion of reality cut deeper than any bullet ever could. Garrett tried to regain control of the story by writing it himself. He published a book about Billy the Kid, hoping to explain what had happened and why. But the damage was already done. To those who wanted a hero, Billy was too perfect to surrender. To those who wanted a villain, Garrett was too convenient. His attempt to reclaim the truth only made him seem defensive, and in the Old West, defense looked like weakness. Slowly, quietly, Garrett's reputation began to rot. Job offers dried up. Friends distanced themselves. Men who once drank with him now looked away. He had become something dangerous, a reminder that sometimes the law does things people do not want to remember. And societies have a way of punishing those reminders. Yet Garrett still believed he had done the right thing. He had seen what Billy was capable of. He had watched the bloodshed. He had lived in a territory that desperately needed stability. To him, Billy's death was not betrayal. It was a tragic necessity. But believing in a truth does not protect you from the cost of carrying it. As the years passed, the world changed around him. The frontier became less wild. Towns grew. Railroads expanded. New generations arrived who knew Billy the Kid only as a romantic outlaw, and Pat Garrett only as the man who ended him. Garrett found himself increasingly out of place in a West that was moving on without him. He tried politics, he tried business, he even tried law enforcement again. But nothing stuck. The shadow of Billy followed him everywhere. The psychological toll was immense. Garrett was haunted by the moment in that dark room at Fort Sumner. The flash, the sound, the weight of history falling on his shoulders. He drank. He grew bitter. He became isolated. The man who once walked confidently through the frontier now carried himself like someone waiting for a verdict that would never come. Yet the cruelest part of his fate was this. Pat Garrett was right. Billy the Kid had been dangerous. The territory had needed him stopped. But America was not ready to admit that sometimes justice does not look heroic. And so Garrett became the sacrifice, the man history would use to keep its story simple. If this story is starting to change how you see the Old West, take a moment now. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below whether you believe Pat Garrett was a villain or a man trapped by his duty. Because the truth of the frontier was never as clean as the legends suggest. Garrett's life after Billy was marked by one long, slow decline. He moved from place to place, chasing opportunities that never quite worked. Every time he thought he had escaped the shadow, it caught up to him. People did not see Pat Garrett the man. They saw Pat Garrett the moment. And a man cannot live forever inside a single act. He became suspicious, defensive, worn down. The frontier he had tried to bring order to had transformed into something else, something that did not need him anymore. And nothing is more dangerous to a proud man than being made irrelevant. By the time Pat Garrett realized that killing Billy the Kid had not given him a future, only a past, it was already too late to change anything. His name was locked into American memory, chained to another man's legend. And no matter what he did next, that chain would never break. Because in the Old West, there was one rule more powerful than the law. Whoever controls the story, controls the truth. After the dust settled from Billy the Kid's death and the headlines moved on to the next sensation, Pat Garrett discovered something far more terrifying than any outlaw. Silence. The applause had faded, the praise from officials had cooled, and what remained was a man standing alone with a reputation he could not escape. Everywhere Garrett went, he was not greeted as a protector of the law, but as the man who had killed Billy the Kid. That single act followed him like a shadow, distorting every conversation, every opportunity. every relationship. The frontier did not forget. It only changed what it demanded. Garrett tried to build a future. He accepted political positions, ran businesses, and attempted to reinsert himself into public life as something more than a footnote in someone else's story. But doors closed quietly. People smiled politely and kept their distance. The New West was being built by bankers, railroad men, and politicians who had little use for a former lawman whose fame came from a killing that divided public opinion. To them, Garrett was unstable, a reminder of a violent past they wanted buried. The psychological weight of this rejection was crushing. Garrett drank more heavily. He grew irritable, suspicious, and bitter. The frontier that once rewarded decisiveness now punished it. He could not understand why the country that demanded Billy the Kid be stopped now recoiled from the man who did it. But deep down, Garrett knew the truth. America wanted the outlaw gone, not the discomfort of what it took to make him disappear. As the years passed, Garrett's finances deteriorated. Bad investments, failed ventures, and mounting debt trapped him in a cycle of desperation. He was no longer riding out to capture criminals. He was riding out to escape his own irrelevance. In the Old West, power had shifted away from men with guns toward men with money and influence. Garrett had neither. He was slowly being pushed out of the world he once helped tame. Enemies began to appear where none had existed before. Ranchers, businessmen, and political rivals saw Garrett not as a threat, but as an obstacle, a man who could be removed without consequence. Rumors spread. Deals were made behind closed doors. The same shadowy politics Garrett had once fought now circled him. He was becoming what Billy the Kid had been, inconvenient. Garrett sensed the danger but could not identify its source. He had spent his life watching for outlaws in the open, not assassins in boardrooms. He carried his gun. He trusted fewer people. But age and exhaustion dulled the instincts that once kept him alive. The frontier had changed, and Garrett had not changed with it. In 1908, while traveling near Las Cruces, New Mexico, Pat Garrett was ambushed and shot. There was no dramatic showdown, no warning, no chance to defend himself. The man who had killed the most famous outlaw in the West was himself killed in silence. His body lay on the road, another victim of the same unforgiving world he once enforced. The reaction was muted. No national mourning, no outcry. Just a quiet acknowledgement that Pat Garrett was gone. The irony was bitter. Billy the Kid's death had ignited legends. Garrett's death barely stirred memory. History had chosen its favorite. Yet in that quiet ending lies the true tragedy of Pat Garrett. He was not evil. He was not a coward. He was a man who did what the law demanded in a time when the law was still fragile. He ended a threat so others could live in peace, and paid for it with his own peace. The frontier does not reward men who make hard choices. It remembers the men who make beautiful stories. And Pat Garrett's story was never meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be necessary. Pat Garrett did not live long enough to be forgiven by the country he served. And that may be the most American part of his story. He killed Billy the Kid because the law demanded it, because the territory needed stability, because chaos could not be allowed to keep winning. And yet, in doing so, he became the man no one wanted to stand beside. The Old West did not collapse when Billy died. It began to modernize. Railroads expanded. Towns grew. Law became something written in books instead of carried on horseback. But Garrett was never allowed to belong to that new world, because the new world did not want to remember the violence that built it. History prefers its heroes simple. It prefers outlaws who can be romanticized or lawmen who die cleanly in battle. Pat Garrett fit neither mold. He was a man who pulled the trigger in a dark room and lived with the consequences. He was the embodiment of an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes peace is purchased with actions no one wants to celebrate. Billy the Kid became a legend because his story was tragic and unfinished. Garrett became a ghost because his story was too real. What Garrett represents is something deeper than a single killing. He represents the burden carried by those who enforce order in a world that secretly longs for rebellion. Americans have always admired the rebel spirit, the man who stands against power. But every nation also depends on someone to say enough when that rebellion becomes destruction. Garrett was that someone, and he paid for it with his life, his reputation, and his peace. When Garrett was gunned down on a lonely road, there were no ballads written, no crowds gathered, no monuments raised. And yet, his death was just as much a part of the frontier's story as Billy's. The West had devoured both men in different ways, one for defying it, the other for trying to tame it. Today, when Americans look back at the Old West, they often celebrate freedom, courage, and independence. But buried beneath that image is another truth. Every era of freedom is held together by people willing to make impossible choices. Garrett made one of those choices. He ended a legend so a territory could move forward. And history, uncomfortable with that reality, chose to remember the legend instead. But without men like Pat Garrett, legends would never end. Chaos would never yield, and the frontier would never become a nation. If this story made you think, take a moment now. Leave a like to support honest American history. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that go beyond myths. And comment below, do you believe Pat Garrett was a villain or a man who sacrificed everything for order? Because the true cost of law is not measured in arrests. It is measured in the men who must live with the consequences.